A chance encounter. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the cobblestone streets of Savannah, where life seemed to drift along at a languid southern pace. Amy Bennett wiped her hands on the faded apron tied tightly around her waist, exhaustion settling into her bones. The cafe clock struck 5, and the warm chatter of locals mingled with the clinking of dishes and the hum of ceiling fans. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, offering a brief respite from Amy's worries. Her gaze wandered to the corner table where a man sat, his presence both enigmatic and commanding. He was impeccably dressed in a navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed back, and his posture radiating an aura of quiet authority. For the past month, this man had become a regular during Amy's shifts, sitting alone and nursing a cup of coffee for hours. Amy glanced at Liz, her manager, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Liz smirked knowingly as she whispered, "He's here again. I doubt it's just for the coffee." Amy rolled her eyes, brushing off the comment. "Maybe he likes the view," she said, gesturing toward the cafe window that overlooked the bustling street. But a part of her was unsettled, unable to dismiss the quiet intensity with which the man seemed to observe the world. And her. As the cafe began to empty, the man stood, his coffee cup empty. He approached the counter where Amy stood, her heart unexpectedly quickening. Up close, his piercing gaze was even more unsettling. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice deep and calm. Amy blinked in surprise, fumbling with the cloth in her hands. "Yes." The man held out a pristine business card, his movements deliberate. "I believe we need to talk," he said. "Meet me after your shift. I'll be waiting outside." Before she could respond, he turned and walked out, leaving her staring at the card. The name printed in bold letters was instantly recognizable: Charles Whitmore. Liz appeared at her side, peering over her shoulder. Well, looks like you've caught the attention of Savannah's most eligible and eccentric bachelor." Amy frowned. She had no time for games, let alone wealthy strangers with cryptic offers. Her mother's worsening health and the mounting medical bills were all she could think about. Yet, as her shift ended, curiosity and a small flicker of hope compelled her to step outside. There, leaning against a sleek black car, was Charles. His expression was calm, almost expectant. "You came," he said, his tone carrying a hint of satisfaction. Amy crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "I don't know what this is about, but I don't have time for games." Charles didn't flinch. "Neither do I, please. Get in. I'd like to discuss something that might interest you." Her instincts screamed at her to walk away, but the weight of her responsibilities pressed her forward. Against her better judgment, she slid into the passenger seat, her heart pounding as the car began to move. The proposition. They arrived at Forsyth Park, where the ancient oak trees stood like silent sentinels under the fading light. Charles led her to a secluded bench, the Spanish moss swaying gently in the breeze. His calm demeanor contrasted with the turmoil brewing inside her. "I'll get straight to the point," he said, his voice steady. "I know about your situation, your mother's illness, the bills piling up, your brother's future. You're struggling, and you're running out of time." Amy froze, her breath hitching. "How do you know all that?" "I make it my business to know," he replied evenly. "And I'm here to offer a solution." Her stomach churned. "What kind of solution?" Charles met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Marry me." The words hung in the air, surreal and almost absurd. Amy stared at him, disbelief and indignation surging within her. "You're joking." "I assure you, I'm not," he said. "This is a mutually beneficial arrangement. You'll have financial security, and I." He hesitated briefly before continuing. "I have my reasons for needing a wife." Amy shot to her feet, her voice trembling. "You think I'd sell myself to you for money? That I'm some kind of charity case?" Charles remained calm, his gaze unwavering. "I think you're a smart woman who understands the reality of her situation. Your mother is dying, Miss Bennet. How much longer can you keep this up?" The truth of his words cut deep, leaving her speechless. Her mother's labored breathing, the endless stack of bills, and her brother's unyielding determination to succeed. They all flashed through her mind. Charles' offer wasn't just a proposition. It was a lifeline. "I won't force you," Charles said, rising to his feet. "But my offer won't last forever." He walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. As she sat under the sprawling oak, tears blurred her vision. She hated him for putting her in this position. But deep down, she hated the circumstances that had left her with so few choices. A new beginning. The following morning, Amy stood before the grand iron gates of the Whitmore estate. The sheer opulence of the mansion was overwhelming, its towering columns and sprawling gardens a stark contrast to her modest life. Charles greeted her at the entrance, his expression unreadable. "You've made your decision, then?" Amy nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions, adjustments, and unspoken tension. Charles treated her with respect, but kept a certain distance, his true motivations remaining a mystery. Amy, now thrust into a world of wealth and influence, felt like an outsider navigating an unfamiliar landscape. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, Amy began to see glimpses of another side of Charles, a man burdened by his own secrets and regrets. Slowly, they began to build a fragile understanding, each learning to navigate the complexities of their arrangement. In time, Amy realized that her decision, though unconventional, had granted her something far greater than financial security. It had given her the chance to rebuild her family's future and perhaps discover a deeper connection in the most unexpected of places. Life often forces us into impossible choices where the line between right and wrong becomes blurred. Amy's story is a testament to resilience, the sacrifices we make for love, and the unexpected paths that can lead us to hope and redemption. The proposition and the storm within. The car's hum was the only sound between them as Charles drove through Savannah's winding streets. The city lights blurred past the windows, painting fleeting patterns of gold and white on the car's sleek interior. Amy sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Questions churned in her mind, but she remained silent, unwilling to show the storm brewing within. They arrived at Forsyth Park, its ancient oaks casting elongated shadows under the dim glow of street lamps. Charles stepped out first, his movements deliberate and composed. He opened her door without a word, gesturing for her to follow. Despite her misgivings, Amy trailed him to a secluded bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and moss, and the quiet hum of cicadas filled the night. Charles turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Let's not waste time," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "I've observed you for some time, Miss Bennet, and I know your situation. Your mother's illness is worsening, and the medical bills are insurmountable. Your brother Noah has a promising future, but his education will be derailed without financial support. You're drowning, and there's no one throwing you a lifeline." Amy's breath caught in her throat. The raw accuracy of his words was like a slap, and she hated how exposed she felt. "How do you know all of this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Are you stalking me?" Charles' expression softened slightly, though his tone remained steady. "I have resources, and I use them. I make it my business to know what matters to me." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "You need help, and I'm offering it." Amy narrowed her eyes, suspicion flickering in her gaze. "Why? What could you possibly gain from helping me?" He hesitated for the first time, his polished facade cracking just enough to reveal a hint of vulnerability. "I have my reasons," he said carefully, "but this isn't charity. I'm proposing an arrangement, one that benefits us both." Her heart pounded as she waited for him to elaborate. When the words came, they were simple but earth-shattering. "Marry me," he said. Amy stared at him, her mind struggling to process the audacity of his proposition. Marry you? She echoed, her voice rising. You can't be serious. I am, Charles replied, his calm demeanor unshaken. In exchange, I'll pay off your debts, cover your mother's medical expenses, and ensure Noah finishes his education without financial worry. In return, you'll provide the stability I need, a wife, a partner to help maintain the life I've built. The silence between them was deafening. Amy shot to her feet, her hands trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. You think I'd sell myself to you for money? That I'd trade my dignity for some twisted business deal? Charles stood as well, his towering presence unyielding. I think you're a realist, he said evenly. And I think you understand that pride won't pay for your mother's care or your brother's future. I'm offering you a way out, an opportunity to save them and yourself. Her chest heaved as she struggled to contain the flurry of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Why me? She demanded, her voice cracking. Of all the people in the world, why me? He regarded her for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Because you're strong, he said finally. Because you've faced more hardship in your young life than most people could endure, and you've done it with grace. And because, he hesitated, his voice softening. Because I believe we can help each other. Amy's throat tightened, and she turned away, unable to look at him. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, that she would find another way. But the weight of her reality pressed down on her like a heavy shroud. Her mother's frail figure flashed in her mind, the labored breaths, the pale skin, the way her once vibrant spirit seemed to dim with each passing day. She thought of Noah, sitting at the kitchen table late into the night, his textbooks spread out before him, his dreams of becoming an engineer seemingly out of reach. Charles's voice broke through her thoughts, steady but laced with finality. I won't force you, Amy. The decision is yours. But time isn't on your side, and my offer won't stand forever. He turned and walked away, his polished shoes crunching softly against the gravel path. Amy stood frozen, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she watched him disappear into the darkness. The weight of his words lingered in the air, heavy and unrelenting. The inner struggle. That night, Amy lay awake in her small, cluttered bedroom, staring at the cracked ceiling. The sounds of the city outside seemed distant, muffled by the storm raging in her mind. Charles' proposition replayed over and over, his calm voice contrasting sharply with her own chaotic thoughts. She turned her head to look at her mother, who slept fitfully on the worn couch in the corner of the room. The faint rise and fall of her chest was both a comfort and a painful reminder of how fragile her condition had become. In the kitchen, Noah was still awake, his pencil scratching against paper as he worked through another set of equations. Amy's chest tightened as tears welled in her eyes. She had always prided herself on being resourceful, on finding a way no matter how difficult the circumstances. But this time, she was at a breaking point. Every door seemed closed, every path blocked. And now, the one opportunity she had been given felt like a double-edged sword. She thought about Charles, his sharp suit and piercing eyes, the way he carried himself with an air of absolute certainty. There was something about him that unsettled her, but there was also a strange, undeniable sincerity in his offer. He didn't try to sugarcoat it or manipulate her. He had laid out the terms plainly, leaving the decision in her hands. Amy wiped her tears and sat up, her hands trembling as she reached for the business card he had given her. The crisp white edges caught the dim light of the bedside lamp, and the words Charles Whitmore seemed to leap off the page. Her heart ached as she thought of her mother and Noah. They had sacrificed so much already, and she couldn't bear to see them suffer any longer. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when the people she loved most were counting on her. With a deep, shuddering breath, Amy made her decision. A new beginning or a cage. The morning sun rose slowly over Savannah, bathing the city in hues of amber and gold. Amy stood at the grand iron gates of the Whitmore estate, her hands clutching the small bouquet of gardenias that Charles had insisted she carry. Her heart raced as she stared at the sprawling mansion before her, its towering columns and immaculate grounds a stark reminder of the world she was about to step into. She had spent the night tossing and turning, questioning her decision at every turn. But when the first rays of dawn pierced her small bedroom window, she had resolved to see it through. The weight of her family's needs eclipsed her doubts. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about survival, about giving her mother and Noah a chance at a better life. The gates swung open with a soft creak, and Charles emerged from the grand staircase leading to the mansion. He looked as polished as ever, his tailored suit sharp against the opulence of his surroundings. His face was calm, unreadable, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes as he saw her. "You came," he said, his voice carrying an air of quiet triumph. Amy nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm here." Charles descended the steps, his movements measured. When he reached her, he extended a hand. "Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Whitmore." The title hit her like a punch to the gut. She flinched but placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered what lay behind his composed exterior. They ascended the steps together, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The mansion loomed larger with every step, its grandeur both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The massive double doors swung open to reveal an interior that took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting prisms of light across the marble floors. Ornate gold accents adorned the walls, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Everything was immaculate, from the polished banisters to the intricately carved furniture. It was a world so far removed from her own that it felt almost surreal. "This will take some getting used to," Charles said, his tone casual, as if they were discussing the weather. "But I trust you'll settle in quickly." Amy's gaze drifted to the walls, where oil portraits of the Whitmore lineage hung in silent judgment. She stopped in front of one that caught her attention, a dark-haired woman with striking green eyes and a faint, enigmatic smile. The nameplate beneath read Isabel Whitmore, 1982 to 2010. "That's my late wife," Charles said softly, coming to stand beside her. His tone carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Isabel loved this house. She brought life to it in ways I could never hope to replicate." Amy glanced at him, surprised by the sudden vulnerability in his voice. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, unsure of what else to offer. He nodded but said nothing more, his gaze lingering on the portrait for a moment before he gestured for her to follow. They continued through the grand halls until they reached a woman with neatly pinned gray hair and a starched black dress. "This is Clara," Charles said. "She's the housekeeper. If you need anything, she'll see to it." Clara inclined her head, her expression professional but cool. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice crisp. "Welcome to the estate." "Just Amy, please," she replied, offering a hesitant smile. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned and led Amy up the sweeping staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit, the heavy curtains drawn tightly over the windows. Clara stopped at a door near the end of the corridor and pushed it open. "This will be your room," she said, stepping aside. Amy stepped inside, her breath catching. The room was beautiful, if not overwhelming. A four-poster bed draped in silk dominated the space, and a sitting area by the window offered a view of the sprawling gardens below. The furniture gleamed with polish, and a faint floral scent lingered in the air. "It's lovely," Amy said, though the lavishness felt suffocating. Clara hesitated at the door. "There are certain rules in this house," she said, her tone guarded. "It would be wise to respect them." Amy frowned. "What kind of rules?" Clara's eyes flickered toward the hallway, as if checking for unseen observers. "Mr. Whitmore values privacy above all else. There are parts of this house you're better off avoiding." Before Amy could press further, Clara excused herself, closing the door with a quiet click. The finality of the sound sent a shiver down her spine. The first evening. The day passed in a blur of introductions and awkward interactions. Charles had arranged a small gathering of his closest associates to introduce his new wife, and Amy found herself thrust into the role of hostess, her every move scrutinized by a room full of polished strangers. The dining room was an exhibition of wealth, its long table adorned with crystal candelabras and gleaming silverware. Amy sat beside Charles at the head of the table, her plate untouched as she observed the guests. They spoke in low, calculated tones, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. "This is Amy," Charles said, his voice carrying easily over the low hum of conversation. "My wife." The word felt foreign, wrong. She forced a polite smile as the guests turned their attention to her, their expressions varying from mild curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. "She's quite young," one of the women remarked, her voice dripping with condescension. "How did you two meet?" Charles's smile didn't falter. "It's a long story," he said smoothly. "But suffice it to say, we found each other when we both needed it most." Amy's face flushed, the implication hanging in the air like a weight. She focused on her plate, willing the evening to end. The growing unease. As the days turned into weeks, Amy began to feel the true weight of her decision. The estate, for all its beauty, felt like a gilded cage. The rules were unspoken but ever-present, and the staff moved with a quiet efficiency that made her feel like an outsider. Charles remained an enigma, kind but distant. He treated her with respect, ensuring her family's needs were met without hesitation. Yet there was a guardedness about him, a wall she couldn't seem to breach. She often found herself wondering about the man behind the polished exterior and the secrets that seemed to haunt him. One night, unable to sleep, Amy wandered through the dimly lit halls. She paused outside a door at the end of a rarely used corridor, her hand hovering over the ornate handle. Something about the silence on the other side felt oppressive, as though the room itself held its breath. Before she could open it, Clara appeared, her expression sharp. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low but firm. Amy stepped back, startled. "I was just—" "It's not safe," Clara interrupted, her gaze hard. "For you or anyone." Amy returned to her room, unease settling deep in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that the Whitmore estate held more than just the weight of its grandeur. It held secrets, too, and whether she wanted to or not, she was now a part of them. Cracks beneath the surface. Weeks turned into months, and Amy found herself adjusting to the rhythm of life at the Whitmore estate. From the outside, it seemed idyllic, a life of luxury and comfort, far removed from the struggles she had known. Her mother's health had improved under the care of top doctors Charles had arranged, and Noah had started college without the weight of financial stress. Yet, for all the material ease, Amy couldn't shake the growing unease that gnawed at her. The mansion, with all its opulence, began to feel less like a home and more like a labyrinth. Its grand hallways, ornate furniture, and towering ceilings seemed designed to swallow her whole. The staff, though polite, maintained an air of detachment, their faces unreadable and their movements mechanical. And Charles, he remained as enigmatic as ever, a man who spoke in measured tones and kept his true self hidden behind a veneer of control. But the cracks in the perfect facade began to show. The locked door. It started with the door at the end of the west wing, the one Clara had warned her to avoid. Amy had tried to put it out of her mind, telling herself that it was none of her concern. But the door haunted her dreams, its presence heavy with unspoken truths. On more than one occasion, she found herself wandering toward it, only to stop short, her heart racing as she imagined what might lie beyond. One evening, as a storm raged outside, curiosity got the better of her. The mansion was eerily quiet, the thunder masking the sound of her footsteps as she crept through the dimly lit corridor. She paused in front of the door, her fingers hovering over the handle. Her pulse quickened, a mix of fear and determination coursing through her. Before she could turn the knob, a voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Amy spun around to find Charles standing behind her, his face shadowed, but his eyes blazing with an intensity she had never seen before. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker, more urgent. "I was just," she stammered, but her words faltered under his piercing gaze. "This door is off limits," he said, his tone sharp and unyielding. "It's for your own good." "For my own good," she echoed, anger flaring within her. "I live here now, don't I? Shouldn't I have the right to know what's behind it?" Charles stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Some doors are better left closed, Amy." His words sent a shiver down her spine, and for a moment she considered pressing him further. But the storm in his eyes made her think twice. She nodded reluctantly and turned away, though the question burned in her mind. The ghosts of Whitmore. The incident with the door only deepened Amy's sense of unease. She began to notice other peculiarities around the mansion. Staff members whispering in corners, the way certain rooms were always kept locked, and a lingering sense of being watched. One afternoon, while exploring the library, she stumbled upon an old photo album tucked away on a high shelf. The leather binding was worn, and the pages smelled of age and dust. As she flipped through it, she recognized the faces of Charles's family, their expressions frozen in time. One photograph stopped her cold. It was a picture of Charles and Isabel on their wedding day. Isabel's dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her green eyes seemed to sparkle even in the faded image. But it was Charles who held her attention. His smile was radiant, his gaze filled with a warmth she had never seen in him. He looked like a man in love, a man transformed. Amy's heart ached as she studied the image. Isabel's death had clearly left a void in Charles's life, one he had tried to fill with walls of stone and routines of control. But what struck her most was the haunting resemblance between herself and Isabel. The dark hair, the delicate features, it was as if she were staring at a ghostly reflection. When she confronted Charles about it that evening, his reaction was as guarded as ever. "Isabel was unique," he said, his voice tight. "But she's gone now, and nothing will bring her back." "Then why did you choose me?" Amy pressed, her voice trembling. "Why me, of all people?" Charles hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the portrait of Isabel that hung in the dining room. "Because you remind me that life can move forward," he said finally, "even if it's not the way we imagined." His words were both an answer and a deflection, leaving Amy with more questions than before. A gathering storm. As the days passed, the tension in the house became almost palpable. Amy's relationship with Charles remained a delicate balance of formality and fleeting moments of connection. There were times when she caught glimpses of vulnerability in him, a softening of his gaze, a lingering silence that spoke of unspoken pain. But just as quickly, the walls would go back up, leaving her to wonder if she would ever truly know the man she had married. One evening, during a particularly lavish dinner party, the air in the room grew heavy with unspoken truths. The guests, a mix of Charles's business associates and old acquaintances, sipped their wine and exchanged pleasantries, but their eyes lingered on Amy with thinly veiled curiosity. "She's quite the catch, Charles," one man remarked, raising his glass. "You've always had a knack for finding the extraordinary." Amy forced a smile, but the comment felt like a veiled jab. She excused herself from the table, her heart pounding as she stepped out onto the terrace. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the suffocating atmosphere inside. As she leaned against the railing, staring out at the moonlit gardens, Charles appeared beside her. For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension between them almost tangible. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of something that sounded like regret. "Do what?" Amy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pretend," he replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I know this isn't what you wanted, and I know I've asked more of you than anyone has a right to." Amy turned to face him, her anger giving way to something softer. "You gave me a choice," she said, "and I made it. For my family, for their future, but I didn't know it would feel like this." Charles met her gaze, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Neither did I," he admitted. In that moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink, and for the first time, Amy saw not the aloof businessman or the calculating magnate, but a man grappling with his own humanity. But the question that lingered, unspoken, was whether their fragile connection could survive the secrets and shadows that loomed over the Whitmore estate, and whether Amy could ever find a way to truly belong in a world that seemed determined to keep her on the outside. The shattered veil. The weeks that followed were a study in contrasts. By day, Amy played the role of Mrs. Whitmore, gracefully navigating the expectations of her new life. She attended charity galas, hosted elegant luncheons, and posed for photographs beside Charles with a practiced smile. But by night, when the mansion fell silent, her thoughts returned to the locked door in the West Wing and the unanswered questions that seemed to multiply with each passing day. The Whitmore estate was a place of beauty, but it also held an air of isolation. Despite the wealth and grandeur, the house felt like a prison, a gilded cage that kept her tethered to a life she wasn't sure she wanted. And though Charles had moments of vulnerability, his walls remained firmly in place, leaving her to navigate the growing distance between them alone. But everything changed one stormy evening when the veil of secrecy surrounding the Whitmore estate finally shattered. A fateful night. The storm had been building all day, dark clouds rolling in over the Savannah skyline. By the time night fell, the rain lashed against the mansion's windows, and thunder rattled the very foundations of the house. Amy stood by the drawing room's massive bay window, watching the tempest unfold. The uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at her for weeks was stronger than ever, a low thrum of anxiety that refused to be silenced. Charles had left earlier in the evening for a business meeting, and the mansion felt emptier than usual. The staff moved about with quiet efficiency, their expressions unreadable. Clara, however, seemed more tense than usual, her sharp gaze darting toward the West Wing whenever she passed through the main hall. Unable to ignore the pull any longer, Amy made her way toward the forbidden corridor. The flickering light of a single wall sconce illuminated the path ahead, casting long, ominous shadows. She stopped in front of the door, her heart pounding in her chest. This time, she wasn't going to walk away. With a deep breath, she turned the handle. To her surprise, it gave way easily, and the door creaked open to reveal a dark, narrow staircase leading downward. A chill seeped into her bones as she descended, the air growing colder with every step. The staircase opened into a dimly lit room that felt entirely out of place in the opulent mansion. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, ledgers, and old photographs. A large desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with papers. But what caught her attention was a series of framed newspaper clippings pinned to a corkboard on the far wall. Amy stepped closer, her breath catching as she read the headlines. Tragic accident claims life of Isabel Whitmore. Mystery surrounds death of Savannah's beloved socialite. Questions remain unanswered in Whitmore case. Her eyes scanned the articles, each one painting a picture of a woman whose life had been cut short under circumstances that remained murky at best. The details were sparse, but one thing was clear. Isabel's death had not been as straightforward as Charles had led her to believe. Amy's hands trembled as she picked up one of the photographs on the desk. It was a candid shot of Isabel standing in the very gardens she had admired from her bedroom window. Her smile was radiant, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a hint of sadness that sent a shiver down Amy's spine. "What are you doing here?" The voice startled her, and she spun around to find Charles standing in the doorway. He was soaked from the rain, his hair disheveled, and his usually calm demeanor replaced by something darker, something bordering on anger. "I could ask you the same thing," Amy shot back, holding up the photograph. "Why is this here, Charles? Why do you have a shrine to Isabel hidden away like some dark secret?" He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. "Because she is a dark secret," he said, his voice low. "One that I've spent years trying to keep buried." Amy's chest tightened as she took a step back. What happened to her? "The truth, Charles. I deserve to know." For a moment, he looked as though he might deflect or deny her question, but then his shoulders sagged, and the mask he wore so effortlessly began to crumble. He leaned against the desk, his hands gripping the edge as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Isabel didn't die in an accident," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "She took her own life." The revelation hit Amy like a physical blow. She stared at him, struggling to reconcile the image of the vibrant woman in the photographs with the tragedy he had just revealed. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What happened?" Charles closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. "She was sick, Amy. Not in a way anyone could see, but in a way that consumed her from the inside out. Depression, anxiety, they ate away at her until she couldn't fight anymore. I tried to help her, but I didn't see how far she had fallen until it was too late." Amy's heart ached for him, for the guilt and grief that were etched into every line of his face. But there was still so much she didn't understand. Why hide it? Why turn it into this secret? "Because people don't want the truth," he said bitterly. "They want a story they can accept, a tragic accident, a grieving widower. The truth is messy, and it doesn't fit neatly into the world I live in." Breaking the chains. The storm outside had calmed by the time Charles finished his story, but the storm within Amy had only grown. She saw now that Charles wasn't just a man who had built walls to keep others out. He was a man who had trapped himself inside. "Is this why you married me?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "To replace her?" Charles shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "You're not a replacement, Amy. I chose you because you're strong in a way I never was. You remind me that it's possible to survive, even when everything feels broken." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. For the first time, she saw the man behind the carefully curated image, the man who had loved and lost, who had made mistakes and carried the weight of them every day. "You don't have to do this alone, Charles," she said, reaching for his hand. "But you have to let me in. No more secrets, no more walls." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of hope and fear. "I don't know if I can," he admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together," she said. "But this house, this life, it can't be built on lies. If we're going to have a chance, we have to face the truth. All of it." For the first time, Charles nodded, a faint glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness in his eyes. Together, they left the hidden room behind, the past still heavy but no longer suffocating. And as they stepped into the light of a new day, Amy knew that their story was just beginning. A future rewritten. The weeks that followed were a quiet reckoning, both for Amy and for Charles. The truth about Isabel was no longer a hidden shadow. It became a part of their shared story, a chapter they acknowledged but didn't allow to define their future. The locked door in the West Wing was open for good, and the secrets it had held were finally laid to rest. For Charles, letting go of the burdens he had carried for years was like learning to breathe again. He began to open up, sharing the pain, guilt, and regret that had consumed him since Isabel's death. Amy listened without judgment, her empathy and strength providing a safe space for him to confront his past. For Amy, the journey was one of self-discovery. She had entered the marriage out of desperation, driven by the need to save her family. But in the process, she had found something unexpected: her own resilience, her own voice, and a deeper understanding of the complexities of love and sacrifice. A new beginning. One sunny afternoon, Amy stood in the gardens of the Whitmore estate, her hands tending to a bed of blooming gardenias. The estate, once cold and unwelcoming, had begun to feel like a home, not because of its grandeur, but because she had claimed it as her own. The garden was her project, a living testament to growth and renewal. Charles joined her, a rare smile softening his features. He carried 2 cups of tea and handed one to her before settling on the bench beside her. "You've done wonders with this place," he said, gesturing to the vibrant flowers. "I didn't think it could ever look this alive again." Amy smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It's amazing what a little care and patience can do. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. That goes for more than just gardens. She looked at him, her heart full. You're starting to get the hang of this whole letting people in thing, aren't you? He chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. I had a good teacher. The lesson. Their story wasn't a fairy tale, nor was it a simple happily ever after. It was a story of imperfect people navigating a world of complicated choices and unexpected challenges. Together, they learned that healing doesn't come from pretending the past never happened. It comes from confronting it, understanding it, and choosing to move forward. Amy's journey taught her the importance of courage, not just the courage to endure hardship, but the courage to embrace the unknown. She learned that strength isn't about avoiding vulnerability. It's about finding the bravery to let others see who you truly are. Charles's journey was one of redemption. He discovered that no amount of wealth or control could erase the pain of loss, but love, real, honest love, could help mend even the deepest wounds. And he realized that true partnership isn't about saving someone. It's about standing beside them as equals, ready to face whatever comes together. A life reclaimed. Years later, as Amy walked hand in hand with Charles through the bustling streets of Savannah, she reflected on how far they had come. The girl who had once felt trapped by her circumstances had found her freedom, not in wealth or privilege, but in the choices she had made and the life she had built. She had grown into herself, and so had Charles. Together, they had transformed the Whitmore estate into a place of joy, where laughter echoed through the halls and life flourished in every corner. Their story became a reminder that even in the face of loss, uncertainty, and seemingly impossible choices, it is possible to find hope, to rebuild, and to create something beautiful. The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. What matters is how we choose to move forward, and the people we choose to walk that path with. And in the golden light of another Savannah sunset, Amy knew she had chosen well. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.